Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of the EU Spectator, where we delve into the latest developments and crucial issues shaping the European Union. Today, we focus on the recently concluded European Parliament elections, dissecting the results and their broader implications for the continent. To guide us through this analysis, we are joined by Merili Arjakas, a distinguished junior researcher fellow at the International Center for Defense and Security in Estonia, and a respected expert in European affairs. Thank you very much, Merili, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So in this episode, we will explore the significant impact of the European Parliament elections outcomes on Europe's security policy. These elections are not just a reflection of the political landscape, but also a pivotal factor in shaping the EU stance on critical security issues. Merili will provide her insights on how the new composition of the Parliament, of the European Parliament, might influence policy decisions and strategic priorities in the face of emerging global threats. We'll also turn our attention to the domestic policy issues within the Baltic states, examining how these regional dynamics play into the broader EU framework. The Baltic states, with their unique geopolitical position and historical context, offer a fascinating lens through which to understand the interplay between local and EU-wide policies. Merili's expertise will help us to understand the complex political tapestry of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, shedding lights on their most pressing domestic challenges. The first issue will delve into the outcome of the European Parliament elections, who emerge victories and who face setbacks. These elections are a crucial barometer for understanding the shifting political tides within the European Union. They reveal the public sentiment on various issues, ranging from economic policy to immigration, and help determine the legislative agenda for the coming years. Merili, please tell us, which political parties or movements do you think were the biggest winners and losers in these elections, and why?
EP elections are very interesting because on one hand, they're European. They take place at the same day, providing us really a snapshot of the political situation in 27 member states.
Mm-hmm.
On another hand, they are still very national. So the results differ widely on each member state. There are some broad trends that can be seen, but we can see that there are actually many debates over the true significance of the last night results, depending a lot on which viewpoint you take. And I'm doing this long introduction because throughout today and probably in the upcoming days, we will see lots of media headlines about the victory of the far right, how the EU pivots to the right. On one hand, that's definitely correct. We can see that especially in France, in Germany, where the far right parties did better than the government parties. We can also see that in Italy, where Meloni, the prime minister herself, comes from a far right party who was also rather popular in the EP elections. But then if you look at, let's say, Poland or Hungary or Scandinavian countries, then their winning isn't that clear at all. So that already provides this very interesting scenario that, yes, we can talk about that the far right was rather successful, but the center still held. So I'd say that the center is actually the second winner of the EP elections, especially the Conservative Party group, European especially the Conservative Party group EPP, who actually managed to gain seats. So the third winner is Ursula von der Leyen, who comes from EPP and who now has a rather strong position to lay claim for a second term as head of the Commission. Now, we will see in the upcoming weeks and months how the Commission will be formed, who will eventually become part of it. But I'd say those three, so the far-right parties, the EPP and Ursula von der Leyen, are my winners of the election. Now, the losers are definitely French President Emmanuel Macron, because he already declared that the election results will become, he dissolved the parliament because of the election results. So French will have a legislative elections in 3 weeks. It will be a very interesting campaign trying to turn back the surge to Marine Le Pen in just 3 weeks. Let's see how successful he will be, if this gamble will pay off. And now the second loser is Greens, who managed to unfortunately reduce their seats. And with that, the third loser will be the EU climate policies, because 5 years ago there was a rather clear majority for the Commission's very ambitious Green Deal legislation, and it's not clear at all that the support will now hold.
But as we know, one of the key aspects of the analysis, it's understanding the performance of traditional political powerhouses compared to newer or fringe parties. Established parties often have the advantage of name recognition and a track record in governments at local level, but they also face a scrutiny over past performance. On the other hand, newer parties may capitalize on public dissatisfaction and offer fresh perspectives, but they must overcome the challenge of building a solid political base, as you mentioned. But another critical dimension is the geopolitical variation in election outcomes. The results can differ significantly across member states, reflecting local issues or regional political climates. For instance, the electoral success in Western Europe might differ strictly from that in Eastern Europe, influenced by different economic conditions, historical context, and security concerns. I'd like to ask you that can you provide an overview of the regional variation in the elections outcomes and what they might indicate about the future political landscape of the EU?
All in all, I would say it's very difficult to even describe any strong regional dynamics, just because the EP elections, well, first of all, EP elections are weird. In a way that so much is just dependent on few candidates, especially in smaller countries such as Estonia, but many European countries are small in that regard. They only have rather few members in the European Parliament, and much will depend on the candidates themselves. For example, in the Estonian context, we can see that, for example, Social Democrats have often been far more popular in the EP elections than they are in the national elections. And you can see a similar dynamic play out in other countries as well, that the parties who might not be as successful in the national elections or for some reason can gain much more popularity in the European Parliament elections, which at least in the political science literature, has often been described as those second-order elections when people are much more doing a protest vote or perhaps even sometimes voting for what their heart says, voting for candidates that they might not support in the national elections because they perceive that not as much is at stake. So yes, we can try to make some claims that it was the Western European countries where the far right proved to be more popular, especially in France, Italy, Germany, and then in Central Eastern European countries. Poland is a good example where they actually, and Finland also, where they were not as popular. Then, for example, Greens were not losing that much in Scandinavian countries, where the nations still pay a lot of attention to climate policies and see it as a political priority. But overall, I'm not sure if we can even make any such very strong regional claims, because it all boils down to what is the situation in the member state.
Turning our attention to Estonia, the European Parliament elections brought forth some intriguing results that reflect the country's current political climate and its citizens' priorities. Estonia, known for its robust digital infrastructure and progressive policies, often serves as a bellwether for broader regional trends. The election outcomes here not only mirror domestic concerns, but also align with European issues such as security, economic development, and integration. In this election, Estonia voters made their voice heard, with results showcasing a blend of support for established parties and a growing interest in newer political movements. Traditional parties like the Reform Party and the Centre Party maintain significant support, indicating a stable base among the Estonian electorate. Meanwhile, I think newer or less conventional parties also made notable gains, suggesting a desire for fresh approaches to long-standing issues like in other European countries. This mix of continuity and change highlights a dynamic political landscape that merits closer examination. So, tell me, please, how do you think the election results will affect Estonia's approach to key areas such as digital innovation, security, the Green Deal, and security?
Well, first of all, the election results show that very little will change for Estonia. We can already say that Estonia has 7 seats in the European Parliament, and 5 of them will be filled with the current members of the European Parliament, most certainly. One of them might be because the Centre Party, the head of the Centre Party, Mihhail Kõlvart, received the most votes. But throughout the campaign, he sometimes more clearly, sometimes less clearly said that he will remain in Estonia and this position will go to the current incumbent of the European Parliament, Yana Toom. So depending on how that goes, 5 or 6 of the MEPs will be the same who are currently there. And the 7th one is a very long, very old face in Estonian politics, but he's worth discussing a little bit more because with Jüri Ratas, we have a very interesting case of former party leader of the Centre Party championship going to a different party, running as, not even as a lead candidate of Isamaa. He was seen as one of the three main candidates for the conservative Isamaa party. And he actually managed to outdo the other 2 candidates, which personally for me was a surprise. I expected him to do well, but not to actually get an entire new voting constituency with just a few months. So coming back to the beginning, the Estonian politicians' stances in the European Parliament will largely remain the same. And the priorities that they've had, especially when it comes to the question of support for Ukraine, will also remain as it stands, because at least 5 of the MEPs will be very staunch supporters of Ukraine. The 6th one from the radical right-wing party EKRE, Mr. Jaak Madison, he's definitely not a pro-Russia candidate. He has declared himself to be the most anti-Russia guy in the European Parliament. This is especially interesting because he belongs to the Democracy and Identity political group, which is usually seen as this much more pro-Russia group of the political right-wing parties. So there are some interesting nuances in Estonian showing about the Estonian results. But overall, I'd say the entire campaign and the results are in essence, it's a repeat of the 2019 election, which in itself is very interesting because even though the surrounding world has become so different in the last 5 years, first of all, because of the COVID pandemic, and then because of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, then the Estonian representation in the European Parliament hasn't changed.
But understanding the political agenda of the victorious party in the victorious parties in Estonia is crucial for predicting how they will navigate both national and EU level challenges. These agendas will shape, of course, Estonia's contributions to the European Parliament and will influence the broader policy directions of the EU. Merili, please tell us, what are the primary policy goals of the Estonian parties and the Estonian politicians that performed well in these elections, and how do they plan to address both national and EU level issues?
Well, as mentioned, the first goal is definitely support for Ukraine. And there is a widespread frustration in Estonia that the Western European governments and the US is supporting Ukraine for its survival, but not for Ukraine's victory and Russian defeat. I'd say this broadly constitutes Estonia's foreign and security policy consensus, which is more or less supported by 5 parliamentary parties. Sometimes the center party can become an interesting case there, but they wouldn't be pro-Putin, even though a large part of their overwhelmingly they are now being voted by the Russian speakers in Estonia. So this is the first priority, but we all know that the European Parliament's influence over foreign and security policy questions remains rather limited, because this by and large comes down to the national governments. There will be some influence there through the formation of the Commission, because this is where the European Parliament has a lot of say. Interestingly, we will have to see how easy it is for, probably it will be von der Leyen who will try to put together the new commission, who will become the key nominations. Estonia will definitely look very closely at the positions of the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and the new Defense Commissioner, which will likely be created now. So these are the 2 jobs that interest us the most, which is not to say that we expect Estonia to be nominated to either one of them. It will certainly be beneficial for us if that happens, but the process of deciding who will be nominated to what position in the commission is a very delicate balance where you have to take into account the geographical balance and the gender balance and the party balance. So it will be decided in those negotiations, and then the European Parliament will have its own say and might not agree with every nomination there at all.
But because you mentioned the war in Ukraine and the support for the Ukrainians, given the unique historical and geopolitical context of the Baltic states, how do you assess the current domestic political dynamics with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and what implications might these dynamics have for their relation, for your relations with the Russian Federation?
I will only talk about Estonia because even though the Baltic states' foreign policy and security policy is very similar because of this historical situation and because of our geographical location and our alliances that we have in NATO and in the EU, our domestic politics aren't that similar actually at all. And I'd say there's also very little understanding of other countries' domestic questions in all of these three Baltic states. If it comes to Estonia, then we have this interesting case that on one hand, the Russia's war in Ukraine is the biggest political question. It's in some way present in all debates, especially when it comes to foreign and security policy, but also economic policy, climate policies, migration. All of these debates are somewhat impacted from the war. However, there, at least among the Estonian majority, there is a consensus between the parties how this war is being seen. So we have this debate over nuances, but not about the big policy questions of whether we should be supporting Ukraine, whether we should be pro-NATO and pro-EU and pro-US transatlantic relations, or there should be some other ways, because the Estonian foreign policy in the last 30 years has been depicted, has been largely done in the priorities that we should be never again alone. This is the lesson that we got from the half a century occupation that we had to undergo during the Soviet Union, that in order to, that first of all, Russia will struggle to recognize us as an independent nation. And secondly, in order to make sure that we are never facing Russia's aggression again alone, we have to be as closely integrated with the Western institutions, international organizations as possible. So this isn't that much of a political debate in Estonia. You can't really expect us to vote for a political leader that will say, let's try to have some peace negotiations with Russia, because the majority knows that Russia will violate all treaty agreements that it has signed. At least the historical account has proven us right in that regard.
Yeah, and also because I'd like to move forward our discussion and to shift our focus towards a topic of paramount importance for Estonia, NATO, and the border geopolitical landscape, the Russian expansion. We know that Estonia, situated on the eastern edge of NATO, finds itself at the front line of tensions between the Western allies and the Russian Federation, like Romania. the specter of Russian expansionism looms large over the region, promoting Estonia to navigate delicate balance between ensuring its security within the NATO framework while maintaining diplomatic channels with its eastern neighbor. Understanding Estonia's position within NATO and its approach to Russian expansion requires a very delicate analysis of historical grievances, strategy imperatives, and I don't know, contemporary security challenges. Recent geopolitical developments, as you mentioned, including Russia's assertive actions in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, have heightened concerns about its intentions in the Baltic region. Against this backdrop, it becomes imperative to explore how Estonia and the Baltic states, as NATO member states, perceives and responds to Russian expansionist ambitions, and what implication this has for regional stability and transatlantic security cooperation. So really, please tell us how do recent escalations in tensions between NATO and Russia, such as increased military exercises and airspace violation, impact Estonia's security calculus within the alliance, and what measures do you anticipate Estonia and its NATO allies will take to address these challenges?
That is a huge question. So let's start from the beginning. As you said, it is truly a very delicate balance of what Estonia is currently doing, because on a positive side, our security situation has actually never been better. We are in NATO. I'd say the last 2 years has proven that the NATO is committed to European collective security far more than actually many skeptics in Eastern Europe expected it to be 10, 15 years ago, when it seemed like how quite often we were somewhat left alone with our worries after, for example, the 2007 bronze crisis, where Russia was aiding the rioters in Estonian streets and holding a diplomatic campaign against us. Then in 2008, we had the Russia-Georgia war, and then 2014, Crimea, and the start of the war in Donbass. In all of those steps, of course, the EU and NATO did something, but for many people here, it didn't feel like doing enough. In some regards, this perception still stands. For example, if we look at truly the years of Russian aggression against its neighbors, that is under the threshold of war, but it's still different kind of hostile actions that they have been undertaking. You mentioned violating our airspace. There's also been jamming the GPS so the airplanes can't land in Tartu airport. Or there was a kidnapping of Estonian security officer from the border about 10 years ago. So these are all being acts when Russia is testing the resolve of the Western unity, of the Western desire to answer to these provocations, and this resolve has been lacking. So therefore, I don't have a good answer how NATO will react to the latest aggressions that Russia has been conducting in the Baltic Sea, for example. It looks like NATO is being careful, but that that's not a wrong policy per se either, because we always have to be sure not to overreact, because we don't want to serve a propaganda victory to Russia either. So it is a careful balancing act, trying to signal to Russia that we will be ready for all military aggression. This is something that NATO has been doing very strongly in the last 2 years. For the first time, there have been very clear defense plans that were agreed in the NATO Vilnius summit and now have been started to implement. So this constitutes definitely the positive side for Estonia's security. Looking over the border, another positive factor is that there really hasn't been that few Russian soldiers next to our borders, basically ever. So many of the Russian soldiers and capabilities are occupied in Ukraine. And it's going to sound very cynical, but every Russian tank that is being destroyed in Ukraine is one less tank that will someday attack NATO territory. And for that, we have to be eternally grateful to Ukrainian army that is defending our borders as well with the lives of their people. What constitutes the negative side for Estonian security is that Russia proved with its full-scale invasion of Ukraine is that the current leadership is prone to miscalculation, because it truly seemed like they were sincerely expecting Kiev to fall within 3 days to make a regime change in Ukraine, that they thought that they will overrun the Ukrainian nation with just 100 or 150,000 soldiers, even though by military standards, this was never enough to take Ukraine as a country. So the Russian leadership started to believe its own hype, started to believe that they don't need much to gain victory over Ukraine, and they might get a similar wrong calculation about the NATO countries. And I am not thinking about Estonia or the Baltic states here, especially because actually the admission of Finland and Sweden to NATO will make the entire Baltic Sea now much stronger, because it has become this one operational theater that, yes, we did expect Finland and Sweden to support us, but now we can finally start practicing different, we can actually start to develop plans together with them, which was something that we lacked before. So that means that for Russia, the weakest part of NATO might not even be the Baltic states or the Baltic Sea anymore. It might, for example, be the Black Sea, where, luckily for us, Ukraine has proven to be very capable with dealing with the Russian Navy. And I wouldn't want to overstate Russian threat to NATO. I think if we can see some further Russian aggression or hostile attempts, it will still be in the countries that do not belong to NATO yet. Well, first of all, Ukraine, but then there's also Moldova, then there are countries in the Caucasus. So these are still far easier victims or easier countries to endanger, because we can see that at least for many Western allies, there's a very different understanding of who is an ally in NATO and who isn't. Their support for Ukraine does prove it.
And because you mentioned the Russian political and military tactics, in light of this experience and Estonia's strategic position as NATO member on the Russian border, I'd like to ask you, how do you assess the effectiveness of current deterrence measures in deterring Russian aggression, and what additional steps do you believe are necessary to ensure Estonia's security and stability in the face of ongoing Russian expansionist activities?
I'd say that the biggest deterrence actually Estonia can have is Ukraine's victory, because if Russia perceives itself to be winning in Ukraine, the security situation for all Russia's neighbors will significantly deteriorate, basically no matter what we do. NATO has stepped up quite a lot in recent years. We have different allied troops within the Baltic states. And my military friends always remind me to say that the biggest NATO troops Estonia has are Estonian Defense Forces. So it's not like we are just free riding in the alliance. The Baltic states have also been contributing a lot in their own security to signal to Russia about our deterrence posture, that if you try to do something, you will be destroyed. This is basically the message that the militaries of the Baltic states are sending. So if we talk about the deterrence in the eastern flank, then yes, it still comes down to how the situation in the Ukrainian battlefields evolve. We need much more military support to Ukraine right now, so they would be able to withstand the Russian aggression and also go on a counteroffensive, because we don't want to create a situation where Russia thinks that it's beneficial for them to continue their imperialist expansion over Ukrainian borders.
President Klaus Iohannis of Romania is set to partake in a significant event in Riga tomorrow, the Bucharest Forum 9, the B9 summit, which he will co-chair alongside the president of Latvia. This summit holds a particular importance as it underscores the commitment of 9 Central and Eastern European nations to collaborate on key regional Eastern issues and to collaborate to support Ukraine. The participation of President Iohannis not only signifies Romania's active engagement in regional affairs, but also highlights the country's dedication to fostering multilateral cooperation within the European Union and NATO. Given the strategic significance of multilateral cooperation for Estonia and for the Baltic states, it's essential to delve into the importance of initiatives like the B9 summit. These platforms provide an opportunity for smaller nations to amplify their voices and collectively address common challenges, ranging from security threats to economic development. As Estonia and its Baltic neighbors navigate complex geopolitical dynamics, forging strong ties with regional partners, including Romania, it's vital for enhancing resilience and promoting shared interests within the European and transatlantic frameworks. Merili, how do you perceive the role of multilateral initiatives like the B9 Summit in addressing security concerns and promoting regional stability for Estonia and the Baltic states? And what specific benefits do these platforms offer to smaller nations within the European Union and NATO?
Well, as I said, we're all small nations, Romania and Poland being the biggest in the eastern flank, but all other countries being rather small, and just putting our backs together and finding very like-minded countries, like-minded allies, is very beneficial for us. Also to influence the bigger Western states such as Germany and France and the US, because there's one thing if something is Estonia saying, not even alone, we are not really alone in these questions, but if it's Estonia and the Baltic saying one thing, that's one thing. If it's the entire B9 saying something, that's a different thing entirely. I'd say that is something that Estonia has not learned in the last 2 years, because we've always been very active in building coalitions in the European negotiations. But in the last 2 years during the war in Ukraine, the partnerships between the Eastern flank countries, such as in the cooperation of the B9 format, but also with the Nordic Baltic group, have been strengthened a lot, just to, well, first of all, find like-minded allies, and secondly, to have a stronger presence in the European negotiations, in NATO negotiations, also in the context of the United Nations, where you can see that these countries very often partner up and present speeches together as a whole, just to show that their voice carries far more than just their one country.
But considering the diverse geopolitical challenges facing both Romania and Estonia, and also both regions, what measures do you believe can be taken to enhance bilateral and multilateral cooperation between our countries and regions, particularly in areas such as defense, cybersecurity, and economic integration?
If you want to know about the bilateral cooperation between those two countries, you have to ask our Minister of Foreign Affairs what they're doing. All in all, I would say that a lot of this actually does take place in the form of multilateral organizations, just because that's what we have the multilateral organizations for. That's why we have NATO, that's why we have the European Union, to bring together countries who have a similar understanding. I think B9 is an interesting case of trying to build a joint view of security topics in the Eastern flank. Not even a joint view, because I think that the view is there, but more to understand that, for example, the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea can be very interconnected. And we should have an understanding of how these theaters influence each other, because for Russia definitely sees that as one big strategic theater where they are going to clash with the Western states. Another initiative, for example, that comes to mind is the Free Seas initiative that the Polish government has been pushing a lot in the last few years for a bigger economic infrastructure. I'm personally very much in favor of seeing the Eastern and Central European countries to gain more leverage in the EU, because I think still, even though we joined the EU 20 years ago, quite often we are still treated as the new member states. I mean, 20 years ago, it's not actually new anymore. But we shouldn't try to recreate the geographical differences too much either. All in all, I think that there's still far more that unites the whole European countries. Our geopolitical understanding about the war in Ukraine, about other issues that are influencing Europe's standing in the world. If you're looking for differences, of course you will find them. For example, earlier I also expressed my frustration that maybe the Western European countries have not been supporting Ukraine as much as we want them to be. But if you're looking for similarities, you will also find that we are sometimes far more united than we make it up to be.
Yeah, that's true. As our discussion draws to a close, it's evident that the topic we have explored today highlights the intricate interplay between domestic politics, regional dynamics, and international relations. From analyzing the outcomes of the European Parliament elections to delving into the complexities of Baltic domestic policy issues and the challenges posed by Russian expansions, we've gained valuable insights into the multi-faced landscape shaping the European Union and its member states. And moreover, your exploration of Estonia's participation in multiple initiatives like the V9 summit underscores the importance of collaboration and solidarity among European nations, particularly in the face of shared security concerns and geopolitical uncertainties. The discussions surrounding the significance of multilateral cooperation for Estonia, the Baltic states, and the broader European context highlights the enduring importance of fostering strong partnerships and alliance to address common challenges and advance share interests. As we conclude today's dialogue, it's clear that the issue we have examined requires continued attention, analysis, and concerned actions for policymakers, experts, and why not citizens alike, by remaining engaged in constructive discourse, promoting cooperation, and advocating for shared values and principles. We can navigate the complexities of the ever-evolving European and international landscape, working towards a more security, prosperous, and resilient future for all. Thank you very much, Merili, for your analysis and for your very interesting thoughts. And thank you for accepting to be with us in our podcast.